The candles on my birthday cake were still burning when my world caught fire. 43 candles. 43 years of surviving hell, clawing my way up from nothing, and believing I finally had something worth protecting. The dining room was full of laughter, the smell of vanilla frosting, and the warm chatter of friends and family I'd invited to celebrate another year of life. I should have known Norman was planning something. He'd been too quiet lately, too careful with his words. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. Before the toast, Norman announced, his voice cutting through the happy noise like a blade, "I have something for the birthday girl." Everyone turned to watch as he pulled out a manila envelope from behind his back. My heart started racing, but I told myself it was probably some romantic surprise. A trip to Paris, maybe. New jewelry. Something to make up for all the distance I'd felt between us lately. "Happy birthday, Valentina," he said, his smile cold as winter morning. "Here's your present." I opened the envelope with shaking hands. Divorce papers. My name typed in black ink across the top like a death certificate. The room went silent. Someone's fork clattered against a plate. But Norman wasn't done. He turned to my daughter Camila, my beautiful 22-year-old daughter who'd been standing beside me just seconds before. He pulled her close and kissed her. Not a friendly peck on the cheek. A real kiss. Long and deep and wrong in every possible way. The entire room froze. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. "We're flying to Vegas tonight," Norman announced, his arm still wrapped around my daughter's waist. "Camila and I are getting married as soon as the divorce is final." I felt like I was drowning. The walls of my dining room seemed to spin around me. This couldn't be happening. Not Norman. Not my Camila. But then my daughter stepped forward. Her face was pale, her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady and clear. "Mom," she said, looking straight at me with tears in her eyes. "There's something I need to tell you." And what she said next changed everything. Before we continue, please write in the comment which country you are watching this video from, and if this is your first time on this channel, please subscribe, it helps support our channel. Let's dive in. Let me start from the beginning, because the end won't make sense without understanding how deep this betrayal runs. I was 17 when Camila was born. 17 and broken, carrying a child I never asked for, the result of a night that still gives me nightmares. I won't tell you his name or what he did to me behind the old factory on Elm Street. Some wounds are too deep to put into words. But Camila? She saved me. The moment I held her tiny hand, I knew I had a reason to keep fighting. I worked 3 jobs to put myself through college. I cleaned offices at night, served coffee at dawn, and studied during every spare minute I could steal. By the time I was 30, I owned my own marketing company. By 35, I was successful enough to give Camila everything I never had. Private school, music lessons, college without debt. I was proud of what we'd built together, just the two of us against the world. Then I met Norman. He was everything I thought I wanted. Tall, handsome, successful. He owned a construction company and drove expensive cars. He brought me flowers and took me to fancy restaurants. Most importantly, he seemed to love Camila like his own daughter. "You're both incredible women," he used to say, wrapping us both in his arms. I'm the luckiest man alive. We got married when Camila was 19. She was starting college, studying art therapy, dreaming of helping other survivors like me. I was so proud of her strength, her kindness, her gentle spirit that somehow remained unbroken despite knowing the truth about her father. For 3 years, we were happy. Or at least, I thought we were. Norman treated Camila well. Too well, I realize now. He bought her expensive gifts, took her shopping, insisted on driving her to and from college even though she had her own car. He said he was being protective, that he loved her like a father. I was grateful. Camila had never had a father figure before. Seeing them get along so well made my heart warm. I was such a fool. The first sign something was wrong came 6 months before my birthday. Camila started acting strange. She was quieter than usual, jumping whenever Norman entered the room. She stopped eating dinner with us, claiming she had too much homework. "Is everything okay with school?" I asked her one morning over coffee. She looked up at me with those big brown eyes that had been my anchor through every storm. For a moment, I thought she was going to tell me something important. Her mouth opened slightly, like she was gathering courage. But then Norman walked into the kitchen. "Morning, beautiful girls," he said, kissing my cheek and ruffling Camila's hair. She flinched away from his touch. "Camila's just stressed about finals," I told him. "Of course she is. She's got so much on her plate." Norman sat down across from her, studying her face with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "You know you can talk to me about anything, right, Camila? I'm here for you." She nodded quickly and excused herself from the table. Over the next few months, the changes became more obvious. Camila lost weight. She started wearing baggy clothes that hid her body. She barely spoke during family dinners, and when she did, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Maybe she needs therapy," I suggested to Norman one night as we lay in bed. "She seems depressed." Norman tensed beside me. "She's fine. It's just college stress. All kids go through this. But she's never been like this before. She's always been such a bright, happy girl. Valentina." His voice had an edge to it I'd never heard before. "Drop it. Camila is fine. Stop being so overprotective." I wanted to argue, but Norman rolled over and turned off the light. The conversation was over. 2 weeks later, I found Camila crying in the bathroom at 2 in the morning. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" I knelt beside her on the cold tile floor. She looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. For a second, I saw terror there. Raw, deep terror that reminded me of my own face in the mirror 23 years ago. "Mom, she started, then stopped." Her eyes darted toward the door, like she was afraid someone might be listening. "You can tell me anything," I whispered, pulling her into my arms. "I'm your mother. I will always protect you." She cried harder, her whole body shaking against mine. But she didn't say another word. The next morning, she acted like nothing had happened. Looking back, I can see how carefully Norman played his game. He was a master manipulator, weaving a web so slowly and carefully that neither Camila nor I realized we were caught until it was almost too late. He started small. Casual comments about how Camila should dress more conservatively. Suggestions about which friends she should spend time with. Offers to help with her homework that turned into long, private sessions in his study. "Norman is so good with her," I told my sister Carmen over lunch one day. "He really cares about her education." Carmen raised an eyebrow. "Don't you think it's a little weird how much time they spend together?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, she's 22, Valentina. Most stepfathers aren't that involved." I defended him. Of course I did. I was so grateful to have found a man who accepted my daughter, who seemed to love us both. I couldn't see what was right in front of me. Norman was isolating Camila, cutting her off from her support system piece by piece. Her college friends stopped coming around. She stopped going out, stopped laughing, stopped being the bright, confident young woman I'd raised. And all the while, Norman was there. Helpful, concerned, protective Norman, who drove her everywhere and bought her gifts and insisted on being part of every aspect of her life. The control was so gradual, so subtle, that even I didn't notice it happening. But there were moments. Little things that made my stomach twist. Like the way Norman would put his hand on Camila's lower back when guiding her through a doorway. The way he insisted on buying her clothes, always choosing things that were too small or too revealing. The way he would find excuses to be alone with her when I was working late. "You're imagining things," I told myself whenever doubt crept in. He loves her like a daughter. But daughters don't flinch when their fathers hug them. Daughters don't lock their bedroom doors at night. Daughters don't have panic attacks when their stepfathers suggest family vacations. I should have known. God help me, I should have known. The week before my birthday, Norman was different. Excited in a way that made my skin crawl, though I couldn't explain why. I've got something special planned for your party, he kept saying, that cold smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He insisted on handling all the arrangements himself. The guest list, the decorations, the food. He even bought my birthday dress, a black cocktail dress that felt more like funeral attire than celebration wear. I want everything to be perfect, he said, adjusting the collar of my dress as I stood in front of our bedroom mirror. His hands lingered on my neck longer than necessary. This is going to be a night we'll never forget. Something in his tone made me shiver. Camila had been even quieter than usual that week. She barely ate, barely slept. I found her standing at her bedroom window at all hours, staring out at the street like she was waiting for something. Or someone. Are you looking forward to the party? I asked her the morning of my birthday. She turned to me with hollow eyes. Mom, can we talk? Privately? My heart jumped. Finally, she was going to tell me what was wrong. Of course, sweetheart. Let's go to the garden. But before we could leave the kitchen, Norman appeared in the doorway. What are you two whispering about? His voice was light, playful, but his eyes were sharp and dangerous. Nothing, Camila said quickly, stepping away from me. I was just asking about tonight. Tonight's going to be perfect, Norman said, moving closer to us. Isn't it, Camila? She nodded, but I saw her hands trembling. Good girl, Norman said, and something about the way he said it made my blood run cold. The party started at 7. By 8, our house was full of friends, family, and colleagues, all gathered in our dining room around the table laden with food and decorations. My sister Carmen was there with her husband Tony. My best friend Maria from college. My business partner Mateo and his wife. Camila's old friend Lisa, who I'd secretly invited hoping to cheer her up. Even my elderly neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd helped me through those early years as a single mother. Everyone was laughing, telling stories, raising glasses and toasts to another year of life. It should have been perfect. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. Norman was playing the perfect host, charming and attentive, making sure everyone's glasses were full and their plates loaded with food. But every few minutes, his eyes would dart to Camila, who sat rigid in her chair at the far end of the table. She hadn't touched her food. She hadn't spoken to anyone. When Lisa tried to start a conversation about their old college days, Camila just nodded politely and looked away. She seems different, Carmen whispered to me as we stood by the kitchen island, refilling the wine bottles. I know. I'm worried about her. Have you asked her what's wrong? I've tried, but she won't talk to me. Norman thinks it's just college stress, but... I looked across the room at my husband, who was telling some joke to Tony and Mateo. They were laughing, slapping him on the back, treating him like the great guy I'd thought he was. I don't know. Something doesn't feel right. Carmen followed my gaze. What kind of something? Before I could answer, Norman called out from the dining room. Ladies! Time to cut the cake. We returned to find everyone gathered around the birthday cake Norman had ordered from the expensive bakery downtown. 43 candles flickered in the warm light, casting dancing shadows across the faces of people I loved. Make a wish, Norman said, his arm sliding around my waist. I closed my eyes and wished for the truth. Whatever was happening in my house, whatever was wrong with my daughter, I wished for the courage to face it. I blew out the candles, and everyone cheered. That's when Norman made his announcement about having a present for me. The divorce papers felt like ice in my hands. I read my name at the top 3 times before my brain could process what I was seeing. Norman, I whispered, my voice barely audible over the sudden silence in the room. What is this? It's exactly what it looks like, he said, his voice calm and matter-of-fact, like he was discussing the weather. I want a divorce. I looked around the room at the faces of my friends and family. Carmen's mouth was hanging open. Maria had her hand pressed to her chest. Mrs. Rodriguez was clutching her purse like she was afraid someone might snatch it. "You're doing this here? In front of everyone? On my birthday?" Norman shrugged. "I figured it was the perfect time. Everyone you care about is here to support you through the transition." The word transition hit me like a slap. This wasn't a sudden decision. This was planned, calculated, designed for maximum humiliation. But then he pulled Camila close and kissed her, and humiliation became the least of my concerns. The kiss seemed to last forever. I watched my husband's hands tangle in my daughter's hair, watched her body go rigid with what I now recognize as terror, watched the color drain from every face in the room. When they finally broke apart, Norman kept his arm around Camila's waist, holding her against him like a prize he'd won. "Camila and I have been in love for months," he announced to the silent room. "We're flying to Vegas tonight to get married as soon as the divorce is final." The words didn't make sense. They couldn't make sense. This was my daughter. My baby. The child I'd raised and protected and loved with every fiber of my being. "Camila," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Tell me this isn't true." She looked at me with tears streaming down her face, and I saw the truth in her eyes. Not love. Not happiness. Terror. Pure, desperate terror. And that's when she spoke. "Mom," she said, her voice shaking but determined. "He's lying. I'm not in love with him. I never was. He's been." She took a deep breath, gathering strength from somewhere deep inside. "He's been raping me for 2 years." The room exploded. Carmen screamed. Maria started crying. Tony jumped to his feet, his chair crashing to the floor behind him. Mateo pulled out his phone, already dialing 911. But I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The words echoed in my head like gunshots. "He's been raping me for 2 years. 2 years. While I was working late, building my business, trusting him to take care of my daughter. While I was sleeping peacefully beside him every night, he was destroying the most precious thing in my world." "She's lying," Norman said, but his voice had lost its confidence. "No," Camila said, louder now, stronger now. "You told me you'd kill my mother if I ever said anything. You said no one would believe me because you're so respected in the community. You said I was worthless and damaged and lucky that anyone would want me." Each word was a knife in my chest. My beautiful, brilliant daughter, reduced to nothing by the man I'd brought into our home. The man I'd trusted. The man I'd married. "You're lying," Norman repeated, but now he was backing toward the door. "Valentina, don't listen to her. She's always been unstable. Just like her real father." That's when I snapped. I've always been a peaceful person. Even during the worst moments of my life, I've chosen words over violence, law over revenge. But when Norman mentioned Camila's biological father, when he used my daughter's trauma as a weapon against her, something primitive and fierce erupted inside me. I lunged at him with a scream that came from the deepest part of my soul. My fingernails found his face, drawing blood as I clawed at his eyes. He stumbled backward, knocking over chairs and decorations. "You monster!" I screamed, hitting him with everything I had. "You sick, twisted monster!" Tony and Mateo grabbed me before I could do any serious damage, pulling me back as Norman cowered against the wall, blood streaming from the scratches on his cheeks. "Valentina, stop," Tony said firmly. "Let the police handle this." But I couldn't stop. The rage was consuming me, burning through every rational thought. This man had violated my daughter. He'd planned to humiliate me in front of everyone I loved. He'd used my own home as his hunting ground. 2 years, I sobbed, struggling against Tony's grip. 2 years he was hurting her, and I didn't know. I didn't protect her. "This isn't your fault," Carmen said, wrapping her arms around me. "None of this is your fault." But it felt like my fault. I was her mother. I was supposed to keep her safe. Meanwhile, Camila had collapsed into a chair, her whole body shaking as the weight of her secret finally lifted. Maria sat beside her, holding her hand and whispering reassurances. "The police are on their way," Matteo announced, snapping his phone shut. Norman's eyes went wide. The reality of his situation was finally sinking in. "Camila, tell them the truth," he pleaded. "Tell them how much we love each other. Tell them this was all your idea." Camila looked up at him with something I'd never seen in her eyes before. Not fear, not terror, but pure, burning hatred. "I was 19 when you started touching me," she said, her voice steady and clear. "I begged you to stop, but you said it was normal for stepfathers to teach their daughters about love. When I tried to tell Mom, you said you'd kill her and make it look like an accident." Norman's face went pale. "You made me quit school because you were afraid I'd tell my counselor. You isolated me from my friends. You controlled everything I ate, everything I wore, everywhere I went." Her voice was getting stronger with each word. "You said I belonged to you now, and that no one else would ever want damaged goods like me." "She's lying," Norman whispered, but no one was listening to him anymore. The sound of sirens filled the air. The police arrived with an ambulance and what seemed like half the fire department. Our quiet suburban street was suddenly full of flashing lights and neighbors gathering on their porches to see what was happening. Officer Martinez, a kind-faced woman in her 40s, took charge of the scene immediately. She separated everyone, taking statements, calling for backup, treating the situation with the gravity it deserved. But when she tried to talk to Camila privately, my daughter grabbed my hand. "I want my mom with me," she said firmly. "I need her to hear this." So I sat beside my daughter as she told her story to a stranger. Every word was a fresh wound, opening up the reality of what had been happening in my own home while I was blind to it. Norman had started with small violations. Inappropriate comments about her body. Accidental touches that lingered too long. Walking into her room without knocking, claiming he'd forgotten she was home. When she tried to set boundaries, he'd become angry. He told her she was being ungrateful, that he'd provided for her and loved her like his own daughter, and this was how she repaid him? The first time he forced himself on her, she was 20 years old. It happened while I was at a business conference in Chicago, staying overnight at a hotel downtown. "I tried to fight him off," Camila whispered, staring at her hands. "But he's so much bigger than me." And afterward, he cried and said he was sorry and that it would never happen again. But it did happen again. Over and over, whenever I was working late or traveling for business. He'd threaten her, manipulate her, convince her that no one would believe her if she told. He said Mom had been through enough trauma with my biological father, Camila continued. He said telling her would probably give her a breakdown, and it would be my fault if she ended up in a mental hospital. The cruelty of it took my breath away. He'd used my own past against my daughter, weaponizing my pain to silence her. Officer Martinez took notes carefully, her expression growing darker with each detail. Meanwhile, other officers were dealing with Norman. He'd stopped protesting his innocence and hired a lawyer who arrived within the hour. But the damage was done. Too many people had witnessed his announcement about marrying Camila. Too many people had seen her reaction, heard her confession. "This is enough for an arrest," Officer Martinez told me quietly while Camila was being examined by the paramedics. "But I want you to know, cases like this can be difficult to prosecute. We'll need physical evidence, medical records, anything that can support her testimony." "Whatever you need," I said immediately. "I'll do whatever it takes." As the night wore on, our house filled with different kinds of people. Detectives, social workers, victim advocates. People whose job was to help families like ours navigate the aftermath of unthinkable betrayal. But the person who mattered most was Camila. My brave, strong daughter, who'd finally found the courage to speak her truth. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner," she whispered as we sat together on the couch, watching the police take Norman away in handcuffs. "Don't you dare apologize," I said fiercely, holding her close. "None of this is your fault. None of it. But if I'd been braver. You were protecting me. And yourself. You survived, baby. That's all that matters now. She cried then, deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from years of buried pain. I held her and cried too, mourning the innocence that had been stolen from both of us. The news of Norman's arrest spread through our community like wildfire. By the next morning, it was front-page news in our local paper. Local businessman arrested for sexual assault of stepdaughter. My phone rang constantly. Reporters wanting statements, neighbors offering support, business associates expressing shock and disbelief. I turned it off after the fifth call from a journalist asking how I felt about being betrayed by the man I trusted most. How did I feel? Like my entire life had been built on quicksand. Like every memory of the past 3 years was now contaminated with the knowledge of what was really happening. But mostly, I felt guilty. I should have known, I told Carmen as we sat in my kitchen, surrounded by the debris of the birthday party that had changed everything. Broken glasses, scattered napkins, the divorce papers still lying on the table like evidence of my failure. How could you have known? Carmen asked. He fooled everyone, Valentina. Even me. Even Tony. We all thought he was a good guy. But I'm her mother. I should have seen the signs. What signs? He was careful. Manipulative. These predators are experts at hiding their crimes. Dr. Sarah Chen, the therapist we'd found for Camila, said the same thing during our first family session. Abusers are skilled at creating the perfect facade, she explained. They choose their victims carefully, isolate them systematically, and create an environment where the victim feels they have no choice but to stay silent. Camila nodded from her chair across the room. She looked smaller somehow, like the act of finally telling the truth had released not just her secret but also the facade of strength she'd been maintaining. He made me feel like I was complicit, she said quietly. Like I was choosing to let it happen because I didn't fight hard enough or scream loud enough. That's a common manipulation tactic, Dr. Chen explained. The abuser makes the victim feel responsible for their own victimization. Learning about the psychology of abuse helped me understand what had happened, but it didn't ease the guilt. I was still her mother. It was still my job to protect her. The best thing you can do now, Dr. Chen told me, is support her through the healing process and make sure Norman faces the full consequences of his actions. That became my mission. Justice for Camila. Justice for the years of innocence he'd stolen from her. The investigation moved faster than I'd expected. Detective Williams, the lead investigator on the case, was thorough and compassionate, treating Camila with the respect and dignity she deserved. Within a week, they'd gathered enough evidence to file formal charges. Medical records showing injuries consistent with sexual assault. Text messages Norman had sent to Camila that were clearly threatening and inappropriate. Financial records showing he'd been planning the Vegas trip for months, booking flights and hotel rooms. Most damning of all was the recording. Camila had secretly recorded one of their conversations on her phone, something she'd done in desperation a few weeks before my birthday when Norman had told her about his plan to leave me and take her with him. You belong to me now, his voice said through the phone speaker in Detective Williams's office. Your mother doesn't need to know about us until after we're married. She'll understand eventually. I don't want to marry you, Camila's voice replied, small and terrified. I want you to leave me alone. That's not an option anymore, sweetheart. We've come too far for you to back out now. And remember what I told you would happen to your mother if you don't cooperate. Even through the poor audio quality, the threat was clear. The manipulation was obvious. The power dynamic was undeniable. This recording alone is enough to convict him, Detective Williams told me. Combined with everything else we've found, he's looking at serious prison time. But Norman wasn't going down without a fight. His expensive lawyer tried every trick in the book. They claimed Camila was lying for attention. They suggested she was mentally unstable due to the circumstances of her birth. They even tried to argue that the relationship was consensual, despite the clear evidence of coercion and threats. The preliminary hearings were torture. Sitting in that courtroom, watching Norman's lawyer attack my daughter's credibility, was one of the hardest things I've ever had to endure. But Camila was incredible. She sat straight in the witness chair, answered every question clearly and honestly, and never let them break her down. Mr. Peterson started sexually assaulting me when I was 20 years old, she testified, looking directly at the judge. He threatened to kill my mother if I told anyone. He isolated me from my friends and family. He controlled every aspect of my life. There was nothing consensual about what he did to me. The defense attorney tried to rattle her with aggressive questioning, but Camila held her ground. "Isn't it true that you had feelings for Mr. Peterson?" the lawyer asked. "No, that's not true." "Isn't it true that you initiated physical contact with him?" "No, that's not true." "Isn't it true that you're making these accusations because you're angry he chose to end the relationship?" Camila leaned forward in her chair, her voice strong and clear. "There was no relationship. There was only abuse. And I'm not making accusations. I'm telling the truth." By the end of the hearing, even Norman's lawyer looked defeated. Word of Norman's crime spread beyond our immediate community. The story was picked up by regional news outlets, then national ones. Respected businessman faces charges in stepdaughter assault case. The perfect husband's dark secret. The attention was overwhelming and invasive, but it also brought unexpected support. Other women began coming forward. Women who'd worked with Norman, who'd felt uncomfortable around him but hadn't understood why. Women who'd noticed inappropriate behavior but had dismissed it as harmless flirtation. Sarah, a young woman who'd worked as his assistant 2 years earlier, contacted the police with her own story. "He was always making comments about my appearance," she told Detective Williams. "He'd find excuses to touch me, my shoulder, my back, my hand. When I complained to HR, they said I was being oversensitive because he was such a respected member of the community." Another woman, Jennifer, had been a client of his construction company. "He came to my house to give estimates when my husband was at work," she said. "He made several inappropriate advances, but when I told my husband, he said I must have misunderstood because Norman was such a family man." The pattern was clear. Norman had been testing boundaries, grooming potential victims, using his reputation as a shield for his predatory behavior. But not everyone believed the accusations. Some people in our community rallied around Norman, insisting he was being framed or that the charges were exaggerated. "I've known Norman for 15 years, said Bill Henderson, the president of the local Chamber of Commerce. "He's a pillar of this community. These accusations just don't match the man I know." "Maybe the girl is lying for attention," suggested Ruth Bailey, a woman I'd considered a friend. "You know how teenage girls can be dramatic. She's 22, I wanted to scream at them. And she has no reason to destroy her own life with lies." But I learned quickly that victim blaming was as common as it was cruel. People found it easier to doubt Camila than to accept that they'd been fooled by a predator hiding in plain sight. The worst part was the whispers about me. How could she not know, people asked. What kind of mother doesn't protect her own daughter? Their judgment hurt, but it also strengthened my resolve. If I couldn't protect Camila from what had already happened, I could damn sure protect her from anyone who tried to make her feel ashamed for speaking the truth. Support came from unexpected places. Mrs. Rodriguez, my elderly neighbor, became one of our fiercest defenders. "I saw things," she told anyone who would listen. Strange cars leaving their house at odd hours when Valentina was traveling. That man coming and going from the backyard when the girl was home alone. I should have taken action sooner. Tony, Carmen's husband, surprised me with his anger and determination. "I keep thinking about all the times I shook his hand," he said, his jaw clenched tight. "All the times I invited him to barbecues and treated him like family. I want to find him and beat him within an inch of his life." "Tony," Carmen warned. I know. Let the law handle it." "But God, Valentina, the thought of what he did to Camila." He shook his head, unable to finish the sentence. Even some of Norman's former friends began to distance themselves as more details emerged. His business partner, David, issued a public statement dissolving their partnership. "I cannot and will not be associated with someone who has committed such heinous acts," the statement read. "My thoughts and prayers are with the victim and her family." But the most unexpected support came from my ex-employee, Mike Torres, who'd left my company 6 months earlier to start his own marketing firm. "I need to tell you something," he said when he called me a week after Norman's arrest. "It's about why I really quit working for you." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "Norman came to the office one day when you were at that conference in Denver. He was asking questions about your travel schedule, your client meetings, when you'd be working late. It felt weird, invasive. When I told him it wasn't his business, he offered me money to keep track of your schedule for him." "What?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I told him to go to hell and quit the next week. I should have warned you, but I didn't want to cause problems in your marriage. I thought maybe he was planning some kind of surprise or something innocent." "I'm so sorry, Valentina. If I'd known what he was really doing." Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. Norman hadn't been content to abuse Camila randomly. He'd been strategic, calculated, making sure he had opportunities when I wouldn't be around to interrupt or discover his crimes. The level of planning, the methodical nature of his abuse, made it even more sickening. Through all of this, Camila was the strongest person I knew. She attended every court hearing, spoke to every detective, endured every medical examination and psychological evaluation with a grace that amazed me. "How are you doing this?" I asked her one evening as we sat together in Dr. Lucas's waiting room before a therapy session. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I think I'm running on adrenaline and anger. For so long, I felt powerless. Now, finally, I have some control over what happens to him." She decided to pursue not just criminal charges but also a civil lawsuit. "I want him to lose everything," she said with quiet determination. "His business, his house, his reputation. I want other girls to see that there are consequences for men who think they can get away with this." Her lawyer, Patricia Wells, was a fierce advocate who specialized in sexual assault cases. "Your daughter is remarkably strong," she told me after their first meeting. "But I want you to prepare yourself. The defense is going to try to destroy her character. They'll dig into every aspect of her life, looking for anything they can use against her." "Let them try," Camila said when Patricia explained the challenges ahead. "I've been living in hell for 2 years. I'm not afraid of their questions anymore. But I was afraid. Afraid of what the process would do to her, afraid of reliving the trauma, afraid that somehow Norman would find a way to escape justice." Dr. Lucas helped us navigate those fears during our family therapy sessions. "Healing isn't linear," she explained. "There will be good days and bad days. The important thing is that Camila has reclaimed her voice and her power. No one can take that away from her again." Norman's trial began 6 months after his arrest. The courtroom was packed every day, supporters for Camila, reporters, curious onlookers, and sadly, a few people who still believed Norman was innocent. I took leave from my business to be there for every moment. Carmen and Tony drove down from Sacramento to sit with us. Maria flew in from Phoenix. Even Lisa, Camila's old college friend, came to show her support. The prosecutor, District Attorney Rebecca Martinez, was methodical and thorough. She presented the evidence piece by piece, building an unshakable case against Norman. The recorded conversation was played for the jury. Several people in the gallery gasped when they heard Norman's voice threatening Camila, calling her sweetheart while describing how he owned her. Sarah and Jennifer testified about their own experiences with Norman's inappropriate behavior, establishing a pattern of predatory conduct. Dr. Emily Foster, a forensic psychologist, explained the psychological manipulation techniques Norman had used to control Camila. "This wasn't a relationship," Dr. Foster testified. "This was systematic abuse designed to break down the victim's sense of self-worth and autonomy. The defendant used classic grooming techniques, isolation, threats, manipulation, to maintain control over his victim. But the most powerful testimony came from Camila herself. She took the stand on the third day of the trial, wearing a simple blue dress and speaking in a clear, steady voice that filled the courtroom. "Norman Peterson sexually assaulted me repeatedly over a 2-year period," she began. "He used threats against my mother's life to keep me silent. He controlled where I went, who I spoke to, what I wore, what I ate. He made me believe that I was worthless and that no one would ever love me except him." The defense attorney, Mr. Brennan, was relentless in his cross-examination, but Camila never wavered. "Isn't it true that you had romantic feelings for my client?" he asked. "No, that's not true." "Isn't it true that you initiated physical contact?" "No, that's not true." "He raped me the first time while my mother was out of town. I fought him, but he's much stronger than me." "But you never reported these alleged assaults to the police." "Because he threatened to kill my mother if I told anyone." I believed him. He had already shown me how easily he could manipulate situations and people. "So you're saying you were afraid?" "I was terrified. Of him, of what he might do to my mother, of not being believed. Men like Norman Peterson are very good at appearing respectable while they destroy people behind closed doors." The jury listened intently to every word. I watched their faces, trying to gauge their reactions, hoping they could see the truth that was so clear to everyone who loved Camila. Mr. Brennan's defense strategy was as predictable as it was disgusting. He tried to paint Camila as an unstable young woman who'd fabricated the allegations out of jealousy and mental illness. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he said during his opening statement, "this case is about a troubled young woman who has made false accusations against a respected member of our community. Camila Mendez has a history of instability, stemming from the traumatic circumstances of her birth. She developed an unhealthy obsession with my client and is now seeking revenge because he rejected her advances. It took every ounce of self-control I had not to stand up and scream at him." He brought in a psychiatrist who'd never met Camila, who testified about the psychological effects of being conceived through rape and how that might lead to attention-seeking behavior and difficulty forming healthy relationships. He called character witnesses who praised Norman's community involvement and charitable work, painting him as a pillar of society who could never commit such crimes. But his strategy backfired spectacularly when he called Norman to testify in his own defense. Norman took the stand looking confident, dressed in an expensive suit, his hair perfectly styled. He maintained his innocence, claiming that Camila had seduced him and that their relationship had been consensual. "She came to me," he testified, his voice smooth and practiced. "She was lonely, confused about her feelings. I tried to maintain appropriate boundaries, but she was very persistent." "And what about the recording where you threatened her?" D.A. Martinez asked during cross-examination. "That conversation has been taken out of context. I was trying to help her understand that she couldn't continue pursuing me romantically. The word belong was meant metaphorically, she belonged in our family, as my stepdaughter." "And your plan to take her to Vegas and marry her?" Norman's composure slipped slightly. That was just something I said in the heat of the moment. I was trying to make Valentina jealous, to get her attention. Our marriage had been struggling, and I thought. I wasn't thinking clearly." "So you served your wife divorce papers at her birthday party, in front of all her friends and family, and kissed her daughter in front of everyone, just to make her jealous?" Yes. It was a mistake. A terrible mistake." The jury looked skeptical. Even his own lawyer seemed uncomfortable with the testimony. But D.A. Martinez wasn't finished. She played the recording again, asking Norman to explain specific phrases. "When you said you belong to me now, what did you mean?" "I meant she belonged in our family." "And when you said we've come too far for you to back out now, what were you referring to?" Norman hesitated. I was referring to the emotional connection we'd developed." "The emotional connection where you were raping her?" "I never raped anyone," Norman said, his voice rising. "She wanted it as much as I did. She was 20 years old when you started assaulting her. You were 38. You had complete power over her living situation, her financial security, her relationship with her mother. How exactly did she want this? Norman's face turned red. She could have left any time. She could have told Valentina. She stayed because she loved me. She stayed because you threatened to kill her mother. That's ridiculous. I would never hurt Valentina. I loved Valentina. But you were willing to destroy her by raping her daughter and serving her divorce papers on her birthday? Norman looked around the courtroom desperately, as if searching for an escape route. You're twisting my words. You're making this sound worse than it was. Mr. Peterson, did you or did you not repeatedly force yourself sexually on Camila Mendez over a 2-year period? A long pause. The courtroom was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. It wasn't force, Norman finally said. She participated willingly. That was the moment I knew we'd won. His own words had convicted him. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned to the courtroom, their faces were grim and determined. On the charge of sexual assault in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of sexual assault in the second degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of criminal threatening, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of kidnapping, we find the defendant guilty. Guilty on all counts. Norman's face went white as the verdict was read. His lawyer patted his shoulder, but Norman seemed to be in shock, as if he'd actually believed his own lies about being innocent. Camila squeezed my hand, tears streaming down her face. But they weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of relief, of vindication, of finally being believed. The sentencing hearing was held 2 weeks later. Patricia Wells had prepared a victim impact statement for Camila to read, but when the time came, my daughter stood up and spoke from her heart. Norman Peterson took 2 years of my life, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. He took my sense of safety, my trust in others, my ability to form healthy relationships. He isolated me from my friends and family. He made me believe I was worthless and damaged. She paused, looking directly at Norman for the first time since the trial began. But he didn't break me. I survived. I found my voice. And I want other survivors to know that speaking the truth, no matter how difficult, is worth it. Justice is possible. Judge Harrison sentenced Norman to 12 years in prison, 10 years for the sexual assault charges and 2 additional years for the threats and kidnapping. He would have to register as a sex offender for life. The civil lawsuit resulted in Camila being awarded his house, his business assets, and a substantial monetary settlement. But the real victory wasn't the money or the prison sentence. It was watching Camila stand tall as she walked out of that courtroom, finally free from the man who had terrorized her for so long. The local newspaper ran a front-page story about the conviction. Local man sentenced to 12 years for sexual assault. The article detailed Norman's crimes and included statements from DA Martinez about the importance of believing survivors. The response from our community was mixed. Many people apologized for doubting Camila and expressed admiration for her courage. Others quietly distanced themselves, uncomfortable with the reality of what had happened in their midst. "I'm sorry I didn't believe her at first," Ruth Bailey said when she approached me at the grocery store a few weeks after the sentencing. "I just couldn't imagine someone I knew doing something so horrible." "Now you know better," I replied coldly. Forgiveness would come eventually, but not yet. Not when the wounds were still so fresh. Norman's construction business collapsed within months. His partner David liquidated the assets and donated the profits to a local women's shelter. The house where so much trauma had occurred was sold, and Camila used the money to start a foundation for survivors of sexual assault. But the most important change was in Camila herself. "I feel like I can breathe again," she told me one evening as we sat in our new apartment across town. We'd moved as soon as the house sale was finalized, both of us needing a fresh start in a place unmarked by painful memories. "I want to go back to school," she announced one day, 6 months after the trial ended. "I want to finish my degree in art therapy. I want to help other survivors heal." "Are you sure you're ready?" I asked, worried about pushing too hard too fast. I'm sure. I have something to offer now. I understand trauma in a way I never wanted to, but maybe I can use that understanding to help others. She enrolled in classes the following semester, threw herself into her studies with a passion that reminded me of the bright, determined girl she'd been before Norman entered our lives. Therapy became a regular part of our lives. Individual sessions for both of us, family sessions together, group therapy for Camila with other survivors. Dr. Lucas helped us navigate the complex emotions that came with healing from such profound betrayal. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, she explained during one of our sessions. It means releasing the hold that anger and resentment have on your life. But forgiveness is a choice, and it's okay if you're not ready to make that choice yet. I wasn't ready to forgive Norman. Maybe I never would be. But I was ready to forgive myself for not seeing the signs, for not protecting Camila the way I should have. You can't blame yourself for his choices, Dr. Lucas reminded me repeatedly. Predators are skilled manipulators. They choose their victims carefully and create situations where abuse can occur without detection. You were a victim too, in a different way. Camila's healing journey was different from mine. She channeled her pain into advocacy, speaking at conferences and support groups about her experience. She testified before the state legislature in support of stronger penalties for sexual assault and better resources for survivors. My voice was stolen from me for 2 years, she said during one particularly powerful speech. But now I'm using it to make sure other survivors know they're not alone and that justice is possible. She became the face of survivor advocacy in our state, appearing on television news programs and giving interviews to newspapers and magazines. Her story inspired other survivors to come forward, and several successful prosecutions resulted from her courage in speaking out. Are you okay with all this publicity? I asked her after a particularly difficult interview where she'd been questioned about intimate details of her assault. It's hard, she admitted. But every time I tell my story, I get messages from other survivors saying it helped them find the courage to report their own assaults or seek therapy or leave abusive relationships. That makes it worth it. 2 years after the trial, Camila graduated with honors from her art therapy program. I watched from the audience as she walked across the stage, her smile bright and genuine in a way I hadn't seen since before Norman entered our lives. I couldn't have done this without you, she said as we celebrated at dinner that night. You saved me, Mom. You believed me when it mattered most. You saved yourself, I replied, wiping away tears. You found the courage to speak the truth, even when you were terrified. You're the strongest person I know. She'd grown into an incredible young woman, confident, compassionate, determined to use her experiences to help others. The foundation she'd started with the money from the civil lawsuit had already helped dozens of survivors access therapy, legal services, and emergency housing. My own healing had been slower but equally important. I'd rebuilt my business, stronger and more successful than before. I'd reconnected with old friends and made new ones. I'd learned to trust my instincts again, to believe in my own judgment. Most importantly, I'd learned that love isn't about control or possession. Real love, the kind I had with Camila, is about support, trust, and letting the people you care about grow into who they're meant to be. 3 years after Norman's conviction, I received an unexpected phone call. This is Warden Johnson from Riverside Correctional Facility, the voice said. I'm calling to inform you that Norman Peterson was attacked by other inmates yesterday evening. He's in critical condition at the prison hospital. My first reaction was complex, a mixture of shock, fear, and something that might have been satisfaction. Norman had finally encountered people who judged his crimes as harshly as he deserved. What happened? I asked. I can't give you details about the investigation, but I can tell you that word of his crimes had spread among the other inmates. Men who assault children and stepchildren, well, they don't fare well in prison. Camila was with me when I got the call. I watched her face carefully as I explained what had happened. How do you feel about this? I asked. She was quiet for a long moment, processing the news. I don't wish him dead, she said finally. I'm not that person. But I can't say I'm sorry that he's finally facing the consequences of his actions from people who won't be fooled by his charm or his lies. Norman survived the attack, but barely. He spent 2 months in the prison hospital and would walk with a permanent limp for the rest of his life. More importantly, his reputation among the other inmates was sealed. He would spend the remainder of his sentence in protective custody, isolated and alone. Karma, Carmen said when I told her what had happened. It's not always fast, but it's always fair. For years after his conviction, Norman wrote me a letter from prison. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, mixed in with bills and advertisements, his name on the return address like a ghost from our worst nightmares. I stared at the envelope for a long time, debating whether to open it or throw it away. Finally, I called Camila. He wrote to me, I said simply. What do you want to do? I don't know. Part of me wants to know what he has to say, but part of me thinks giving him any attention at all is more than he deserves. We could read it together, she suggested. If it's another manipulation attempt, at least we'll face it together. So that evening, we sat at my kitchen table and opened the letter. Valentina. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, and I don't blame you. I've had a lot of time to think about what I did, and I want you to know that I'm sorry. I know that's not enough. I know sorry doesn't fix what I broke or heal the pain I caused. But I need you to know that I understand now how wrong I was. Prison has been hard. Harder than I expected. The other inmates don't take kindly to men who hurt children, and I've learned firsthand what it feels like to be powerless and afraid. Maybe that's justice. Maybe that's what I deserved. I think about Camila every day. I think about the bright, happy girl she was when I first met her, and I hate myself for what I did to her. She didn't deserve any of it. She was innocent and trusting, and I violated that trust in the worst possible way. I also think about you. About how I manipulated you, used your love for Camila against both of you, destroyed the life you'd built for yourselves. You were a good wife to me, and I repaid your love with betrayal. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I take full responsibility for my actions. Camila was never to blame. Not for any of it. She was a victim, and I was the predator. I hope you're both healing. I hope you're happy. I hope you never have to think about me again. Norman. We sat in silence for several minutes after reading the letter. What do you think? I asked finally. I think he's learned to say the right words, Camila replied. But I also think it's too little, too late. He had 2 years to stop hurting me, to tell the truth, to do the right thing. He chose to continue the abuse instead. Do you want to respond? She shook her head. I don't need to. I've moved on. He can sit in his cell and feel sorry for himself, but I have a life to live. I was proud of her wisdom, her ability to see through the manipulation even when it was wrapped in seemingly sincere apologies. We threw the letter away and never spoke of it again. Today marks the 5th anniversary of that terrible birthday party that changed everything. Camila is now a licensed art therapist, running her own practice and working with survivors of all kinds of trauma. She's in a healthy relationship with David, a kind man who loves and respects her, who knows her history and admires her strength. I never thought I'd be able to trust anyone again, she told me recently. But David is patient and understanding. He lets me set the pace, never pushes, never makes me feel pressured or afraid. She's also become a sought-after speaker, traveling around the country to talk about survivor advocacy and the importance of believing victims. Her foundation has grown into a major nonprofit organization that has helped hundreds of survivors access the resources they need to heal and rebuild their lives. As for me, I found peace in ways I never expected. My business is thriving. I've reconnected with parts of myself that were lost during those dark years with Norman. I've even started dating again, cautiously, carefully, but with hope. You deserve happiness, Dr. Lucas told me during one of our final sessions. You've done the hard work of healing. You've supported your daughter through her trauma. You've rebuilt your life from the ground up. It's okay to want more than just survival. She was right. I do deserve happiness. We both do. Norman is still in prison. He'll be eligible for parole in 7 years, but given his record and the nature of his crimes, it's unlikely he'll be released early. When he does get out, he'll be a registered sex offender for life, barred from living near schools or parks, required to report his address to authorities regularly. More importantly, he'll be a broken man. The confident, charming manipulator who fooled so many people is gone, replaced by someone who understands what it means to be powerless and afraid. I don't think about him often anymore. When I do, it's not with anger or hatred, but with something closer to pity. He destroyed his own life as thoroughly as he tried to destroy ours, but we survived and thrived while he withered away in a concrete cell. This year, for the first time since that nightmare 5 years ago, I decided to have a birthday party. Nothing elaborate, just close friends and family gathered in my new home, sharing good food and laughter. Carmen and Tony were there, along with Maria and Mateo and their families. Dr. Lucas came, having become a friend as well as a therapist. Patricia Wells, Camila's lawyer, brought her wife and children. Most importantly, Camila was there with David, both of them glowing with happiness and hope for the future. I'm proud of you for doing this, Camila said as we stood in my kitchen, lighting candles on a simple chocolate cake. It feels right, I replied. It feels like we've reclaimed something that was stolen from us. As everyone gathered around the table, I looked at the faces of people who had supported us through the darkest period of our lives. People who had believed Camila when it mattered most. People who had helped us rebuild from the ashes of betrayal. Make a wish, Camila said, echoing the words Norman had spoken 5 years earlier in this very room. I closed my eyes and thought about what I wanted most in the world. Health for both of us. Continued healing. Justice not just for us, but for all survivors. And yes, happiness, the simple joy of being alive and surrounded by people who love us for who we really are. I blew out the candles, and everyone cheered. Later, as the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Camila pulled me aside. Thank you, she said, hugging me tightly. For what? For believing me. For fighting for me. For showing me that love doesn't have to hurt. You're my daughter, I said simply. Protecting you is what mothers do. Not all mothers, she replied sadly. I know other survivors whose families didn't believe them, didn't support them. I'm lucky to have you. As I watched her leave with David, their fingers intertwined, their faces lit with genuine happiness, I knew that we had won more than just a legal victory. We had won back our lives, our trust, our ability to love and be loved without fear. Norman had tried to destroy us, but instead, he had only made us stronger. He had wanted to isolate Camila, to make her feel worthless and alone, but instead, she had become a beacon of hope for other survivors. He had wanted to humiliate me, to break my spirit, to leave me broken and defeated. Instead, I had found a strength I never knew I possessed. The revenge we had sought wasn't just about seeing him punished, though that was important. The real revenge was in living well, in refusing to let his crimes define us, in taking back the power he had tried to steal. As I turned off the lights and locked the door of my home, my safe, secure home where no one would ever hurt us again, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Complete, profound peace. We had survived. We had fought back. We had won. And that was the